Sisters, come together now, come together now. It's time to help each other out, help each other out.
Welcome to the SOAR podcast. This is a platform for sisters to gather and have some empowering conversations. And in the process of these conversations, we help each other overcome some limiting beliefs. I want you to join the conversation. I appreciate your likes, subscribes, and comments. This podcast is sponsored by Stephanie Brown Coaching. If you have any limiting beliefs that are holding you back, feel free to contact the coach at sociotap.com/StephBrownMD. Okay, I'm going to share a little coaching secret with you. One of the ways that we can overcome our limiting beliefs is by revising our thoughts. With the SOAR saying, we get to choose a new thought that expands us and helps us to rise. I don't know about you, but I can use all of the affirmation that I can get. With so much negativity in the world, I bet you can too.
So this week's SOAR saying is, I am fierce and I love the sound of my roar. That's the SOAR saying for this week. I am fierce and I love the sound of my roar. And our topic, being your authentic self in a world full of judgment. Now I get the great honor to introduce my special guest, Rashida George. Rashida George was born on the beautiful island of Antigua and Barbuda, which is located in the Leeward Islands in the Eastern Caribbean. Rashida's family relocated to London, United Kingdom, where she later received an undergraduate degree from Middlesex University before relocating herself to New York City, where she began her career in the helping profession. She later attended Columbia University School of Social Work, which set the foundation for her commitment to supporting youth and families in various systems, including education, social services, and juvenile and criminal justice. Rashida currently lives with her 2 children in Columbia, Maryland, and works for the government as the Restorative Justice Coordinator. She is also a consultant and small business owner. Rashida has a passion for people. Her international work with youth, families, and striving communities exemplifies her intention to create improvement and change to those who have been underrepresented and often ignored. Welcome to SOAR, Rashida.
Thanks, Stephanie. Thanks for having me. I really appreciate you inviting me. It's a pleasure to be here.
It is a pleasure to have you, and I'm really excited about our topic. The topic is being authentic in a world full of judgment. So that's a good topic because I'm sure most people can relate to that. And another reason that I love this topic is because it took me a while to find my own authentic voice and to feel comfortable using it. Mm-hmm. And now I also coach other women to help them find their authentic voice. So I know how important authenticity is.
Right.
I would love to hear your story, your personal story, and how you have gotten to the point where you're able to use your authentic voice.
So, I was born and raised in the Caribbean, and my mother, I lived in London. I was also raised in London. So born there, many Caribbean people migrated, as people do, and come to the States. It's like the place you go to, for greater gain, for education, et cetera, et cetera. And don't get me wrong, the Caribbean has excellent education too. So we moved as a family to London. So I was raised there, spent undergrad in London. And then I was done. I'd been to the States back and forth. We have family here. So we come on vacations. I worked in a summer camp one summer. So I wanted to be a film director, right? And I went to this, it was like an open house for people who were living in Europe who wanted to work overseas. It was called Camp America. Some people may have heard of it years ago, many, many moons ago, giving away my age. The director said it really was just working in a summer camp for youth, children who lived in underserved communities from the South Bronx, Philly, Trenton, Paterson, New Jersey, Newark, New Jersey. And so I was like, yeah, I'm in. He said, this summer it's gonna change your life. And I was like, yeah. For me, I just wanted to get away. I wanted to get out of London for the summer. Literally, it changed my life. So that was kind of the springboard. I did some volunteer work back in London, but that was the connection to really working with and for families, youth, and those who are, their voices aren't as loud or are just unheard, right? And so that was just the beginning for me. And then, just many years later, from being an educator in New York City, then going to social work school because I felt more of a social worker than a teacher, going into administration, and then deciding that I really wanted to do the direct care. I really needed to connect with people. And so just back in the social work arena. And now I'm pretty much, a people person, and that's my work. I feel like I'm here to serve, help, support individuals. And that's it. So restorative justice has become my thing over the past quite a few years since I lived in New York. And now I'm out here in Maryland. So yeah, that's just a snippet. I could go on and on and on and on and on. There's all these gaps in between, but that's me in a nutshell.
Okay.
I have 2 children and I raise my children here in Maryland. Yeah.
Wonderful. Well, we're so happy to have you here in Maryland when you could have chosen any place on the globe to settle down and raise your children, and you're well-traveled. So it's a blessing for us to have you here in Maryland.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
One of the things that's very authentic about you mentioned your Caribbean heritage. Mm-hmm. And I had the honor of going to school with a lot of people from Jamaica or Dominica or different places in the Caribbean, undergrad and medical school.
Nice.
And it always seemed to me that they had some of the most authentic voices. They spoke up loudly, and they were very comfortable in their own skin. And it almost felt like much more so than a lot of African-American women who were raised here. So I don't know if that's just my perception. I just wanted to get your take on that. How do you think your Caribbean heritage affects your authenticity?
So I think it's like middle of the road for me. I get it. I people from the Caribbean, in my experience, we're full of pride. And people would say that about anywhere they're from. Maybe not. But I know we're full of pride, and we're like vibrant, and we are full of passion. And, and so coming from that background, I think, and my family very much celebrated, I come from a family of entrepreneurs also, right? And those like the scholars and the entrepreneurs, right? They were go-getters. And so if you think about some of the islands that we're from also, they're based on tourism. So that draws people to us, right? And so it's a way that we show off our island. And I think the Caribbean's beautiful.
Absolutely.
And so when I say we, I'm thinking of all the people that I know, and I'm thinking of my experience as a younger person and as an adult who still visits family and friends there. I think we are, the women in my family too are hard workers, and so they speak up. They have no cut cards. They're brave, right? And so for me as a young girl growing up and seeing my grandparents and my aunts and my mom and, just hustle and go is good. And also, there's a little like, you're not superwoman in there, right? But for me as a Caribbean woman, I'm just full of pride. People say, you from England? And I always tell them I was raised in England. I was raised in London, but I'm from the Caribbean. And that's how I introduce people to Antigua. I just told someone that today, and they were like, Antigua Bay. And I said, no, Montego Bay is in Jamaica. Antigua is, and people don't know. So they're like, what? And so some people haven't heard of Antigua. It's one of the smaller islands. And there's like this Caribbean joke about, small island people. I'm from one of the smaller islands. I'm not from Jamaica or Trinidad and Tobago, the big islands that people are likely to have heard of. I'm from one of the small but beautiful, small but mighty.
Yeah. Small but mighty.
Yeah.
I love that. And I've definitely experienced that sense of pride in the people that I've met who've been from the Caribbean. And I feel like it's rubbed off too. Because sometimes growing up in, westernized places that have a lot of the more white supremacy is what you see, some of that pride kind of can get squeezed out of you. So
I was going to say that.
Yeah.
Growing up and having your teacher look like you, the bank manager look like you, everyone looks like you, right? And then for me, moving to London, where all of a sudden, none of those people look like me, right? That alone was a culture shock, especially as a kid. Like, forget the cold and all of that. And that was a kicker. But also just who I saw every day, all of a sudden, they looked so different to what me and my family are and what we look like, right? So when you're raised around that, you also envision and like you start to think that, ultimately the president, the prime minister looks like me, everybody will look like me. Everybody in every level of success and, every plateau of life will look like me. That's the perception until you gain a, perspective or reality of experiencing culturally somewhere different. So, yeah, very interesting.
It is interesting.
Yeah.
Now, the second piece of our topic is the judgment piece. So how has judgment made it more challenging for you to be authentic?
Thinking about that, Stephanie, judgment, sometimes we create a lot of that ourselves. So I've learned that I believe we create a lot of the judgment ourselves, and then society does a good job for us too. And I wouldn't say a good job, but they set us up, right? And so there are these societal norms and standards that, we embrace or we choose to embrace. And that really kicks in that value system for us, right? And, until you've accomplished this, or, you look like this on paper, or, you look like this aesthetically too, then, maybe you've got more work to do, maybe that isn't good enough. And so I think we can create that sense of judgment for ourselves, right? And it can be quite damaging. And also, thinking about, so for me, a lot of the judgment came from me internalizing what I shoulda, coulda, woulda, right? Those things at certain points in my life. Nobody wants to be, I don't think anybody who gets into a relationship and is a committed relationship in a marriage or whatever, you don't envision yourself be doing it or parenting alone, right? That's not what you go into it and expecting to come out on the other end, right? Nobody expects for your finances to look very different when you don't have two incomes, and your quality of life shifts a little bit because you have to now pay attention to, one salary, a degree that you quite haven't gotten around to completing or doing or accomplishing, right? So all of these things that are kind of like societal benchmarks that become the voice of your life. Like, that's not your story. Your story is your experience, right? It's the things that you go through, the things that good, the bad, and the ugly of who you evolve into and what you're experiencing every day, right? And so being kind to yourself, or to myself, let me speak for me, and I should start speaking for me, not saying you. That's something I used to say to my students when I was a teacher too, and I find myself doing it. I'm like, no, you're supposed to be speaking about yourself. So Rashida, I had to experience certain things in life, Stephanie, to get to the place of owning my story, acknowledging that was my truth, that this was my experience, and that I was going to own it, go through the hills and valleys, the ups and downs, the highs and lows, and just navigate through this thing called life, right? And I had to stop caring what people thought, the perception that people have. if you know me, you know me. And if you care to talk with me, I'll be authentic and share, right? And not everybody, but let me take that back a little bit. You learn who to share your story with. It doesn't mean that you're not being authentic, right? But you know, not everybody deserves to hear your story, right?
Yes.
Although at some points it can help someone, and if you feel that there's some value in sharing, absolutely. If you think it's going to help, and that's me, right? But I've realized that not everybody deserves that either. You know, so as long as I know what it is and I'm confident about it, and knowing who to share that with I've become more, what's the word? I've become a pro at that, I think, somewhat. Yeah. I share it in circles where I choose to, and I share it when I know and I feel that it can empower somebody else and it's being used for the benefit of others. You know what I mean? Because I think some people intentionally want to know your stuff because they want to use it against you. And because they're coming from a place of judgment, or because they make assumptions about who you are and what you know and, what you've been through.
No, I think that is very true. And I think that is one of the keys to being able to use your authentic voice, is that you use it responsibly, right? You use it when it has the potential to do good, and you don't use it when it has the potential to be manipulated or used for not good. And that doesn't mean that you are ashamed or you're embarrassed, because by the time you get to the point where you're able to use your voice, you've had to overcome some of that. Boom. It just means that you have discernment and intuition.
I like that. Discernment, intuition. And you're right. And it doesn't mean that when you are at that point, you've clearly owned it, right? To be able to verbalize.
So what were some of the things that helped you get to that point? So, there are parts of my story that I remember. There's something I found out like late in life, and owning, what helped me be able to own that as part of my story was, I remember someone shared with me, and she said, wow, just think of how much God loves you and wanted you to be on this earth and a part of this journey called life, that even through a horrible circumstance, he made sure that you were born. And that statement really just stripped all of the shame and the shame, I guess is what it was, embarrassment away from that, and just gave me a new way of seeing it. So I'm just curious how you were able to let go of the self-judgment that you talked about in order to just be able to own your authentic story.
So self-judgment was staying in a relationship that I knew wasn't working for the sake of family, for the sake of creating what I thought, what society makes you believe family is, right? So trying so hard to make it work when I knew it wasn't heading in that direction, right? Oh. So spending a lot more time than the younger Rashida imagined, there are things when you were younger, you're like, I would never, and there's no way I would. And then you become an adult and you experience certain things and you're like, this is kind of what I said I would never do. But so staying there and knowing that there's more harm that's being done than good, right? Mm-hmm. And it gets to that point, and leaving that and starting over, right? And it goes back to, for me, becoming a single parent, right? And reaffirming my worth, right? And you know what I did? I moved back to Antigua. I left New York. I was in New York at the time. And I moved back to home. I moved back home because I still call Antigua. My friends will say to me, what home are you talking about? Because it's like London's home, Antigua's home, New York is home, and Maryland is home, right? Mm-hmm. So I have these homes, and I'm actually quite lucky that I have people that are near and dear and I love in all of those places. So everywhere's home, and that's part of my story. And it was a humbling experience, right? Yeah. But my children went to private school that I probably wouldn't have been able to afford here as a single parent, maybe not, right? Who knows? But my children had that experience. We went to the beach all the time because Antigua has 365 beaches. That's one of my beaches. You must go. I spent time with my parents. My children got to spend time with family that they never spent more than our vacations, 2 weeks every year with, you know what I mean? They lived with these people. They would spend the night with these people. They would, we'd have family gatherings together. So family then it looked different, right?
Yes.
And it was a different place. And for them, it was an adventure. So while I was picking up the pieces and putting this life back together, my children were having a blast. They were loving it, right? They had a different education. My dad cooks every Sunday, and he cooks our traditional food. He cooks saltfish and chop up and boiled plantain and avocado. We call it pear. We don't say avocado pear. We say pear in the Caribbean. So we had that every Sunday. It was, my mother cooks. She's still like that. What she cooks, like, I don't know how she does it every day. But anyway, she may have leftovers Sunday through Monday, but my mother cooks. And so we enjoyed that, right? And I'm so fortunate, my parents built a beautiful house and they gifted me and the children the downstairs. So we had our own unit. So out of that struggle and that headache and that heartache and all of that came something really beautiful, right? And, maybe I wouldn't have, not maybe, I would never had moved. And, now I think about retirement and moving there and, building some house and doing stuff, right? But I would never have, given up my job and just moved if I hadn't been through that experience. And so that was a blessing for me and my kids, right? Yeah. And my family, we got to love on each other in a different way for a longer period of time. And so that was that point in my life where I then became much more brave, accepted the things that I had myself created in my mind that were, this is what life is. This is what I'm going to do. This is how it's going to look. No, sis, it doesn't look like this now. So what are you going to do? Right? Yeah. So picked up those pieces and did what I had to do. And it was a great break. I worked for the government. I had a great job. I worked with some powerful Black women. I was amazed, right? And then I came back here and there you have it. And so that time too was so refreshing for me because it was a combination of, feeling like I'd hit rock bottom and then, just floating to the top and feeling great about being where I was. The sun shines every day. It's like 85 degrees on average. I mean, come on. Do you know what I mean?
I'm ready to go now.
So you need to. The world is opening up. Listen, Antigua, here we come. But yeah, so that experience enabled me to really think about, who I am, what I want, really, I just kind of rediscovered myself at that time. And it's been a journey since then.
Yeah. It's really beautiful how you talked about how you went back home. And I think that happens to a lot of us, whether home is a metaphysical space or an actual physical place. Sometimes you get into these situations in life and you just have to return home to refuel, to recalibrate, to realign, and just re-envision what your life is. And, that's the beauty of home. Yeah. Whatever that is for you. So I would also, you mentioned about your work in restorative justice. I would love to hear about what you do as a restorative justice coordinator.
Sure. So I work for the government as a restorative justice coordinator for one of the government agencies. So it means I work with a few of the other sibling agencies under the public safety, health and human services clusters of DC. And so my job, so restorative justice, and I always have to, it's important to always say this, that restorative justice, it originated from our Native brothers and sisters and our African ancestors, right? We community, it meant that the answer is in our community. We have the answers to all the problems, issues, concerns, and we can solve and heal ourselves in our communities, right? When you think about, so in restorative justice, we typically, and restorative justice isn't circle, but when you think about the circle process, which is one of the main processes that, I'll say RJ, because that's how I get into conversation with work too. We call it RJ. So when you think about us meeting, we sit in circle. When we've seen, the natives or the chief of a tribe, typically people are sitting in circle, right? And there's a fire or there's something that grounds you. When you look at a restorative justice circle, it's set up, of course, in a circle, and there's a centerpiece in the middle, which is, that's the indication, that's the representation of the fire or the thing that's grounding us and bringing us together. So that's a visual, right? And so restorative justice is a philosophy, and it's a philosophy and a practice. So it's a social contract. It's how we see ourselves as part of a community. It's how we help to heal one another. It's how we make the wrongs right. It's how we have conversations and how we support one another to be inclusive in our problem solving, right? And yeah, it's really a way of having conversation. It's just a way of being and doing, right? And so I'm truly passionate about it because I've been able to use the practice and the philosophy in communities that have been severely harmed by violence, with young people who are victims themselves and are now seen as offenders. And quite often our offenders were and are victims, right? So, using it as part of the justice and criminal justice system. Also, we know that Black and brown young youth and adults are disproportionately arrested for crimes that other races are not, right? And so how do we help them have conversations about their experiences? And also, I want to say that restorative justice, for us who are practitioners, our goal is, and we all want to say that with pride, that restorative justice is a new way of justice, right? What does incarceration and what is rehabilitation, and what does incarceration really do, right? Or how rehabilitative, I never say that word correctly, is incarceration, right? And one thing about admitting that you may have done or you did something wrong, it's not always the easiest thing to do, right?
No.
The process, exactly. And people take that for granted. The process creates a space where people are encouraged to acknowledge that. And one of our pillars, the main pillars, is accountability, right? And so how accountable are people for their actions, for what they say and they do, right? And so it's not, we're hearing it as a buzzword now, right? And a lot of people say it, but are they doing it with fidelity? Do they pay homage to its history and origins and the people who've been doing it? And I can't forget the Maori people of New Zealand also. That's just the way these people held their communities and how they supported one another and how they problem solved. So really what we're doing is we are going back to our roots, and we're using the practice in ways that it was used just every day, right? But because we've been so conditioned to be so punitive, right? And used the law to destroy lives that nobody deserves their life to be destroyed, but really destroy some lives because of the racist and white supremacist land that we live on. It's just unfortunate. So there has to be another way of doing justice. And so this is it.
Wow. Now that's really, really deep. And it's very antithetical to a lot of the conversations that are happening now. I was just listening and they were talking about, do you support, given what we know now, do you support the death penalty?
Right.
And this was a conversation amongst Black people, and a lot of people, I was shocked, were calling in saying that they did. And one of the arguments they gave was, when it happens to my family member, I want them punished. I want them, annihilated, I guess, killed.
Right.
I can understand that it's up for debate in other circumstances. But there were a lot of Black people who still believed in the death penalty, knowing that, and the statistic was presented, I think, that at least 3% of the people who have been executed with the death penalty have been found innocent afterwards. And they were saying, well, those are still pretty good odds. That's only 3%. So I was shocked at the conversation. So what do you do with that mindset when you're trying to work with restorative justice?
So you think about, the value. So if it wasn't your family member, then what would it look like, right? I don't know if you'd be able to find it, and I'm not sure. Van Jones did a series on, was it CNN, HBO? I can't remember. It's called The Redemption Project, right? And it took years to prepare, but basically this was a project that showed that where victims of crime, it was a lot of, I think most of the crimes were murder, and I've forgotten. Murder, there was a really bad car accident also where someone became a quadriplegic. But basically, these victims had experienced or family members had been victims of some heinous crimes, right? And so what he did was he found men who were incarcerated, and they were all men, who were incarcerated as the offender, right? And so these men were serving time. And what he did is prepared these individuals to be able to be part of a restorative justice conversation, right? And of course, it took a lot of prep. I'm hoping you can find it, but just to see the power of, so this is what happens is, with the restorative justice process, you are encouraging people to share their story, right? When you give someone the opportunity to share more of who they are, not that you have to forgive. It's not about forgiveness. That's totally up to you. That's not the goal of why we do what we do. It is offering that space, and as a facilitator, creating that safe space for a conversation to be had. Now, it doesn't happen overnight. Sometimes there's a lot of prep that goes into it, right? And so imagine that. I know for a fact that there was a lot of preparation done, facilitators meeting with families, et cetera, over months to talk about the impact, right? Because what you're doing is you're allowing everybody to share their story. The victims are listening to the offender talk about their story, right? The offender is hearing and listening to how the crime or whatever was done impacted this family. Now, in our typical justice system, you don't always get that opportunity, right? The offender often doesn't even have a voice, right? Mm-hmm. We need to hear from you. We're going to hold you accountable. This isn't light and fluffy stuff. It's deep stuff, right? Mm-hmm. And what happens is it humanizes that individual, right? When they start to tell you their story and you hear about their childhood maybe and some of their trauma, and it doesn't excuse their crime. What it does, though, is it puts a face on it, right? It gives that person, there's another story or two or three that you know about this person's entire life story, right? Mm-hmm. The time when they were here, the time when this person did this to them, the time when they experienced this, right? And there you have it. So it's not about excuses. It's about the story. It's about the fact that we are all humans and we all have had experiences, and it doesn't excuse anything, but it creates opportunity.
That is really a wonderful way to kind of wrap back around to our topic, mm-hmm. because our topic is authenticity. And when I think of authenticity, I think of being able to tell your story, your authentic story. And I was going to ask about the value, but you just demonstrated the value. The value of authenticity is being seen as human. and it's connection, being able to connect to another human being, and also being the person who's able to share their story gets value in being able to just share who they are and not be defined by this one moment in time where they committed this crime. So there's so much value in being authentic and being able to share those authentic stories. So that was a wonderful connection to our topic.
No problem.
One of the other things that we talked about recently when we saw each other was racism, and how even in this beautiful, diverse area that we live in, Maryland, and specifically our community, that racism still exists. And I just wanted to ask you what your experience has been with racism.
So, growing up in London, I experienced it. There was covert, overt, kind of conservative where I lived, whatever. So a lot of it was, covert. But here, I think I find myself going back to, is this racism? Not necessarily creating an excuse, but on just walking around and not feeling that you're pulling the race card, because we're not, acknowledging that this is what it is, right? And not having to ask myself and think about it, and try and intellectualize it like I do some things, or like we naturally do, right? No. So part of my recent, and I wouldn't even call it political, but I guess it was a public office, it was a position in a public office, Part of that experience was being an opponent to an incumbent who's white, and also being on the receiving end of an email that was sent out, which was a disparaging one. But what it did is, and I remember saying to my friends, like, these microaggressions, she said, would you stop? This is racism. Right. It's not a microaggression. She's very clear in saying that your run is premature, right? And first of all, we don't just run for things just for the giggles and for, a little bit of fun. You're giving up time away from your family.
Exactly.
It's very taxing. It has to be because you see the value and you know what you have to offer, and that this is something that you're passionate about and you want to do. You want to serve, right? People don't do this because I certainly don't. And I know many people who don't do it because they just don't have anything else to do. It's because they're going to carve a space out in their life because this is what I want to offer my community, right? And the judgment that came from that was about, the racism was that my run was premature and that I couldn't and that the 200-page financial breakdown, the document, it was a 200, which is difficult to understand, right? So that alone was like, are you kidding me?
Yeah.
Right? So what exactly are you saying? Right? And then I just wondered, would you have said this if your opponent was a white woman? And I just don't, in my core, I just don't feel that, right? Yeah. And so it was like that hit you in the stomach, kind of like, yeah, I'm here, I've arrived, does it hurt? Yeah, it's real, And that was very recent. And I remember being so angry. And then I was on my bed one day and I was just sitting and I was thinking, people go through this every day, right? This is a life that so many of us live. Yes. Some people walk into workplaces every day from 9 to 5 and have to deal with this. Our brothers and sisters are experiencing this in many other spaces and places, right?
Right.
But because, this is not utopia, it exists right here on my doorstep. You know what I mean? And so I had a taste of that. And then I also had, individuals posting stuff about who I was and my past, right? And I saw you, Stephanie, this is what happened was, friends of mine, I was working actually, and I received a couple of texts. Hey, how you doing? Call me, whatever. And I was like, oh, these are nice, warm, loving texts I'm getting from people. I had no idea that there was a negative post about me, right? And so I looked at it. No, and then I was on a break and I just opened social media and I dropped my phone. And I was like, you've got to be kidding me. And, I refuse to take on this whole politics is a dirty game thing, right? Which is true in some aspects, right? And then part of my narrative was, this is just my little village, my little space in Colombia. I'm not running for Kamala's position. You know what I mean?
Exactly.
So yes. And I remember a sister calling me and I just started crying.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I needed to get it out. And it came from that first email. And then it came from that post. And I was just like, I'm done. My energy shifted. I was like, I'm over this. But again, I'm, raised not to quit. I'm not a quitter. I sign up for something. I say I'm trying to do and fulfill all the things I say I'm going to do and see things through. And this isn't about me. It's about service and helping and doing and being here for my community. I signed up for this, So, I had great supporters, but that experience definitely was an eye opener. And that was most recent. That was just a month ago. So there you have it. And I'm not, you can't make excuses when it is. If it quacks, it's a duck, right?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And like you said, going through that mental process, that's exhausting, of having to try to figure out, is this a microaggression? Is this racism?
Yeah.
And that's part of the privilege that a lot of people don't realize that they have, that they don't have to even go through that exercise.
No.
And it's traumatic. Even having to process if it's racism is traumatic. And then realizing that it is and having to process that, it's just so much.
It is a lot. And you said that I was so tired. Although I was door knocking and talking to people or whatever, I'm used to exercising. I'm used to being out. I'm used to moving, right? Mm-hmm. The exhaustion came from that mental piece, right? And I was exhausted for a week after that. Mm-hmm. I was exhausted. And I know it was that experience that took it out of me. So when we think about racism in just a broader, larger perspective, when we think about how deeper and even more hurtful the experiences are of individuals, just imagine how they feel every day, right?
Right.
Just imagine when they have to wake up to go to a job, maybe with a racist boss or racist coworkers. The overt stuff, right? Just imagine.
Absolutely.
It's exhausting.
It's exhausting and it's harmful. And that's why the American Medical Association finally declared that racism is an independent negative risk factor on your health, because it is. It is. But I just want to say, just congratulations for running an amazing race and for having the courage to step up, because a lot of us want to do things, but, we're like, we don't have time. We've got jobs, we've got kids, and you have all of that, but yet you still stood up. And I'm sure that there are many victories in your future.
Thank you. And there were many victories in that process too. I had a ton of support. I met some phenomenal people. I had great people who would offer to just door knock and walk with me and hand out flyers and, just people that weren't directly related to me. They weren't necessarily a friend. They were a friend of a friend or someone's husband and just folks. So the win was the connections with new individuals and people who I now call friends and some phenomenal community leaders and people who are doing good and will continue to do good and who I will now support even more so than I have. So that was my win too, more than anything, that was the win.
Yeah. And that's a powerful win.
Yeah. Thank you.
So on this show, I always talk about limiting beliefs. Mm-hmm. And you're in a unique position. You ran for a political position, but before the racism, when you were considering running, what types of limiting beliefs did you have to overcome in order to even push yourself to that point where you were willing to do it?
Thinking about the time that I had, as you know, I'm a, parent of 2 children, a somewhat demanding job, making time to do this on top of all the other responsibilities, because it was something that was, and then just, can I do it? Can I really run? Can I just do this whole campaigning thing? This is like, this isn't the average Rashida. So a lot of my friends think I'm an introvert. They're like, you thought like, what? Of course, when I'm passionate about something, you won't shut me up. That's what I'm about, RJ and other things. And, because it's something that I wanted to do, it got, I developed the willpower and the strength and the energy I find it to do, right? But, I did feel that there were times when I felt like I wasn't connected enough, or, there were all these things that I wasn't enough, right? Mm-hmm. And maybe I should, blah, 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 and all this, which I knew that I had it. I got it. You got it. Mm-hmm. You need to just get out there and do it. But just the limits were stepping outside of my comfort zone, right? Mm-hmm. Even using social media more than I'm a private person. I have social media, but I post my friends joke. They're like, you're like a creeper. You like, but you don't post, like you like everything and you post, and my friend, she jokes. She's like, I feel like I have to send you pictures of me and your godchildren, like we're dating, because you just about get on social media. When you do, you scroll and you like pictures from weeks back. So that's a joke, right? I'm that friend, right? Mm-hmm. But you call me and we can talk and we can text, whatever. So I started using social media more. So there was, so it's like being exposed to the world even more so. And when that exposure is negative too, feeling that was almost a hit, right? Was another hit. So stretching myself more than I imagined I could. But having done it, I know what I need to do to make other things happen now, Yeah. You create that space, you organize your life differently, you prepare dinner like earlier in the day, you woke up and you cooked instead of like scrambling at the end of the day before door knocking again. You know what I mean? Yeah. So I've been doing all of this, but it's more of like, what do I need to do to make this happen? Right? Instead of finding the limit, I don't think I can really do that because I've got blah, 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 blah. It was, what do I need to do? Right? The kind of stuff I help other people do that I don't do for myself, basically. Yeah. So that was the, knowing that there are always possibilities and you just have to create the space to, let them just appear. Mm-hmm. Right?
Yeah, that is awesome. I love that. I love those examples of what you did. So the limiting belief was, I don't have enough time.
Yeah, I don't have enough time. I already have so much on my plate. And asking for help.
Yes.
Accepting help.
Yes.
What are you doing? I can door knock for you or with you, whatever. Like, are you sure? Are you serious? Oh, no, don't worry about it. I can do. No, I got it. Just, where. Accepting help. And knowing that there are people that aren't going to offer if they can't do it. They're offering for a reason. So accept.
Yep.
Yeah.
Oh, that is good. Those are some gems you just shared. So as we come to a close, I just wanted to ask you, what advice would you give my audience about being authentic in a world full of judgment?
Thinking about being honest with yourself about your story. And everybody's story is different. We're all so different in so many ways. We're also similar in so many ways too, right? But everyone's story is different. And so when we get to a place of being able to fully embrace the highs and lows, the swings and the roundabouts, the rough and the smooth, it's like freedom, right? It's like you're not pretending to be all right, we're some of us are, in professional positions, or we need to handle business in a certain way, right? And that's work, right? But, behind all of that, there's this person And I still think we can be authentic at work too, but that's my whole, my thing in my job. Everyone's job is different, right? And there are certain expectations, but I think that there's something to be said about owning your story and acknowledging that we aren't all perfect and that society sometimes sets us up to measure ourselves against who, you know what I'm saying? And there are so many victories, like we see, just as I referred to that win, right? I could also have said I lost a campaign and blah, 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 or whatever. No, there was a win. And this is where the win, was, and will continue to be. So, and judgment, your story is your story, your experience is your experience. And there will always be judgment from somewhere, from someone, and I think that the building confidence, confidence comes from knowing who you are, right? And accepting who you are, what you look like, what you speak like, the color of your skin, the shade of your hair, whatever, right? I can only say, and this is from Rashida's perspective, I developed that authentic voice when I allowed myself to just be and just let go.
Mm-hmm.
And it, for me, it was not the best. It wasn't the happiest space at that time, but I worked through it. And that made me a better person. And that made my voice louder. And that made me accept things that have happened and things that were going to happen, because I was going to make things happen, right?
Mm-hmm.
And acknowledging that for myself. And, I share this with you, and I share this with, and you will share this with who knows who'll listen to this, right? But hopefully the story will help someone, And I wouldn't say I would necessarily share this with any and everyone, right? So, yeah. I have so many thoughts in my mind, Stephanie. I could be talking about this for the next hour, but we don't have enough. So, yeah. Well, we can later on. We've always got time, but yeah,
right.
For the sake of the podcast, yeah.
And I believe that it will. I believe that what you shared will. I think this is good soil that we're planting in, and that the message that we're sharing is going to help a lot of people. And I think that when I went on your social media, you also have a business.
So I have a few, right? So this is the thing. This is the thing, right? Just as you said, when we were talking earlier, that time in my life, when I was away in Antigua, it also empowered me to do the things that I loved to do. I had the time to be creative, right? I love to create things. Like, I love to make things. My mother loves to bake. My mother's like the best cook ever. She loves to bake. My mother bakes a cake. When we were kids, everybody had a freshly baked cake every birthday. My mother has never bought us a store-bought birthday cake. All right, I'll do that as I'm a mom. I've done that, but that's my mom. But so I say all that to say that I was raised with my grandparents too, and my grandfather, he would make fresh juices, right? So I have right now, so going back, so I put everything on hold for those couple of years. I started, then my focus became coming back to the States, rebuilding and getting employment, finding a home. This is how I landed in Colombia. And here we are, right? And so at this point in my life over the past year, I was like, reignite everything again, get back to it. So my juice company, and ironically, I had a meeting yesterday with the person who's helping me develop the website and all the other stuff, and a brand strategist last week. So Alfonso's Beverages, Alfonso is my grandfather.
Okay.
Rest in peace. This is basically, his legacy. He was a community person. He helped individuals. He loved making juices, and I would do that with him as a kid. So this is that homage to my grandfather and his legacy of helping others. So some of my proceeds will go to nonprofit organizations, a certain percentage. And to Beauty with Love is my vegan beauty care, which is actually, I started when I was living in Antigua so that everything is so fun. Everything this summer will be launched again. Those two.
Wow.
Yeah. So it's time. It's go time. It is go time. So I've really been pouring into that, and really been connecting with some fierce women. So those two will be launched very soon. I do some photography actually this weekend. And then a Restorative Future. I that's my consulting business for restorative justice. So I actually work with some government agencies nationwide to help implement, infuse restorative justice practices into their business structures and into some of their systems. So, and I'm working with some phenomenal individuals who really want change. And so it's called the Institute for Restorative Future, but the website is restorativefuture.org. Wow. So there you have it. So I'm just go time. It is go time. And, I'm in a good place and my creative juices are flowing. And I just love to make, so I spend my time just making things, that's it. So that's a little bit about me outside of kids and baseball and volleyball and love. I find some time to do that.
Oh, that's beautiful.
Yeah.
You are fully expressing yourself in all of your multifaceted dimensions, which is a beautiful thing.
Yeah.
So how would we follow you and stay connected so that we will be able to participate in the launch of your juice business and your vegan skincare business? So
To Beauty with Love is on Instagram, right? It looks very bare right now. We'll let everybody know, but tune back in, follow me by all means, but it's going to look so different in about 5 to 6 weeks. Okay. To Beauty with Love and Alfonso's, that's ALPHANSOS, Alfonso. They say Fanso, it's the way we say it in Antigua. His name was, they would call him Fanso, but it's Alfonso's Beverages. That's on Instagram too. Follow me there. And then the websites, the Shopify websites of purchasing is being built out right now as well. So all of that is in the works. I'm truly grateful for the phenomenal women who are helping me to really get this up and running finally. I've been selling, I have an Etsy store as well for To Beauty with Love, where I just sell some of my product. Where I've been selling mainly, that's where I've been selling, but I need to pull it together and kind of professionalize the site and make it my own instead of paying Etsy. I am excited. I will be following all of your sites and wonderful. I'll be looking forward to the launch and how it transforms. Well, this has been wonderful. Thank you for sharing so transparently and authentically. No problem. You are more than welcome. Thank you for having me. I really appreciate it. This is great conversation. Yeah, it really was. Yeah, thank you. And I will talk to you soon. You will. Take good care.
Thanks for conquering those limiting beliefs on another episode of the SOAR podcast. If you want to reach out to my guest, just check out the show notes and all of the contact information is there. If you want more information about Stephanie Brown Coaching, go to www.stephaniebrowncoaching.com. And I'm sure you're already following the SOAR podcast Instagram page. But if not, just go to IG and type in Sisters Overcoming and Rising, all one word. Goodbye for now.